Today I'm going to be discussing Emrakul the Aeons Torn in Vintage Cube. It's going to be a part of a series where I either discuss a single card or an entire archetype. And I'm going to be using the Magic Online Vintage Cube for reference. So, Emrakul the Aeons Torn is one of the most powerful creatures ever printed. It has evasion, it has protection, it makes your opponent sacrifice 6 permanent, which usually wipes a large percentage of their boards. And as you can see, if you can cast it, you get to take an extra turn. And I'm going to both discuss ways you can put it into play or hard cast it. And first, let's talk about where I want to pick it. I think Emrakul is a reasonable card to first pick, but I wouldn't pick it over any power. But I do like to pick it over a duel or a ponder around a remand. And I think it's a very reasonable card to build around in a Vintage Cube. It is usually a card that will win you the game if you get it to work. And there are a lot of cards in the Vintage Cube that makes you find cards. Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm, Factor Fiction. Blue is has a lot of ways to find it. So first, I'm going to be talking about Sneak Attack and Through the Breach. Both are ways to put Emrakul into play with haste, which means that you get to attack with it right away. You don't get the extra turn, but the haste sort of makes up for that. So if you can manage this, you usually win the game, because it's a 15-15 flyer, makes your opponent sacrifice 6 permanents, which makes that it's harder for your opponent to block Emrakul with small flyers. So, with Sneak Attack and Through the Breach, Sneak Attack, you can do this several turns, which is nice if your opponent gets something like Caracas. If your opponent Caracases Emrakul, you can just activate the ability again. It doesn't work with Through the Breach, but there are some ways to answer this, like Venser, Shaper Savant can also work against Through the Breach, and some cards can destroy Emrakul that aren't colored, for example the Wandering Emperor, but you still get the Annihilator trigger. This is a deck that often ends up being blue-red, because you want to combine this with blue cards like Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm, ways to dig up Emrakul. And you can also have a little bit of permission in there, Remand, Counterspell, Force of Will. Force of Will is especially good because it can also help you power through opposing counterspells. So if I'm the Sneak Attack Through the Breach deck, I want Force of Will really bad, I want cantrips, I want some mana fixes. Sometimes you can also combine this with a Splinter Twin combo. You have both combos in there. And sometimes you're a blue-red artifact deck. So, the next way to put it into play is with Shallow Grave Corpse Dance. Both are cards that puts the top creature card from your graveyard into play. So you have to be a little bit careful not to put more cards over Emrakul into the graveyard. And if you have a card that discards creatures simultaneously, you can choose the order. I have to practice a little bit to do that. But this works almost in the same way as Sneak Attack Through the Breach. You get a big attack in, your opponent has to sacrifice 6 permanents. This deck works also pretty good with blue. You can be blue-black. You have cards to put cards in your graveyard. So, Jacerin's Prodigy, Shard of Course, sometimes even works with like Liana of the Veil. You can also be black-red. You have Fateless Looting, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and then you can also be some kind of Sneak Attack Shallow Grave hybrid. Black-red with Sneak Attack, Emrakul, Shallow Grave, and stuff like that. This is almost works in the same way, but does play out a little bit differently. Alright, so now let's talk about one of the ways you can actually hardcast Emrakul to get the extra turn, which can be pretty good because you then get to attack with other stuff too after you have untapped. And you also get to draw an extra card. And yeah, taking an extra turn is nice. You still get to get the Annihilator trick and everything like that. So first card is Channel. This is green for a card that makes you pay mana, pay life to add mana. So for 15 life you can hard cast an Emrakul, get the extra turn, get to attack with the turn after. You can also, if you have spare mana, pay less than 15 life. Let's say you have 4 lands in play, 2 mana for Channel, and the rest is paid with life and the mana you have left over. So the downside with this strategy is that it costs you a lot of life. So if you're playing as mono red or sometimes mono white, mono green, you may not have the life to spare. So you have to be a little bit careful. Here blue-green again, you notice a common trend is a lot of these decks are blue. Because with blue you get access to Mystical Tutor, we can find Channel. You can also be like a blue-green playing Oko, playing Mana Dorks. I mean, Burst of Paradise works nicely here because Channel is color intensive with double green. So blue-green again. You can also be mono-green that just plays Emrakul as a way to channel it out, and then you can sometimes hard cast Emrakul if you get cards like Rofellos, Gas Cradle, Nissa, who shakes the world. And you also get the extra turn that way, but that's more of a backup plan. And if you're blue-green, you may also have access to the next card I want to talk about, which is also a good card with Emrakul, and that's Shelldock Isle, a card that lets you play a card with Hideaway from the top 20 cards of your library. This is not a card that I would necessarily build around with Emrakul that much. It's more a card that you can put in your deck and have a nice synergy, because it's very hard to put Emrakul in the top 4 cards of the Shelldock Isle. Let's say it's almost only 10% to get Emrakul on the top 4 cards randomly. There are cards like Brainstorm, Jason Mind Sculptor that can help you put the Emrakul under the Shelldock, but this is very unreliable. I would more look to have this be a payoff. If I already have Emrakul, I will pick Shelldock Isle very highly. And this way, it also is hard cost, even if you're only paying 2 mana. You get to put Emrakul into play, take an extra turn, and you can also do it instant speed at the end of your opponent's turn for extra rub-ins. Okay, so as I was mentioning earlier, you can also play Emrakul in mono green. Here I found that it more reliably works with Kozilek and Ulamog, because the difference between 10, 11 mana and 15 is quite large. So what happens is you have Rofellos, Gas Cradle, Nissa Shakes the World, and you can produce an absurd amount of mana. This is usually something that happens if I already have Channel, but I can also see doing this if I'm completely lacking a win condition. I have a lot of mana ramp in green, and then sometimes you don't end up with Ugin or Craterhoof, and you just want a finisher. So then you can use this mana ramp with Emrakul, but it takes a lot. 50 mana is a lot, so I will be very cautious to do that. Another way to use Emrakul is in a storm deck. So let's say you have a storm deck that can create a lot of mana with High Tide in combination with Turnabout, Frantic Search, cards like that. Then you can use Emrakul as a win condition. Let's say you don't end up with Brain Freeze or Tendrils of Agony. Then hard casting Emrakul could be a backup plan, or it could be the main plan. Now I wouldn't first pick Emrakul and then try to go into a storm deck, but if that's what's happened, then it's fine. You then get to take the extra turn and attack with it and that. So it's more like if I don't end up with any of the good win conditions, or if my opponent has an Eldrazi of their own to beat Brain Freeze, then Emrakul hardcasting Storm is a good backup plan. Alright, lastly I'm going to talk with a card I don't recommend, and that's Show and Tell and Eureka. So this card puts Emrakul into play, but it does not have haste, and you did not hardcast it. So your opponent's gonna get to untap with the permanent they got to put to play, which should be almost anything, not a planeswalker in the case of Show and Tell. But there is a lot of cards that just owns Emrakul, even though it has protection from colored. So there is Jace the Mind Sculptor, Palace Jailer, that can just deal with Emrakul cleanly before it even gets to attack. There is also Deceiver Exar can tap it down. There's a lot of things your opponent can do. There's also Treachery. And not for the fact to mention that your opponent can sometimes just kill you with some combo. So I do not recommend Show and Tell Emrakul. It's something I would, let's say I first pick Emrakul and I didn't get there. Yeah, maybe you can craft around Show and Tell and Eureka, but I really don't recommend it. Okay, so these are some of the ways that you can use Emrakul to good effect. One last thing I want to mention, Emrakul, Ulamog and Kozilek are sort of does a similar thing, but Emrakul is the most powerful. All these cards also work with Kozilek and Ulamog. It's just that it does it a little bit. It's a little less rewardy. So I could still do it, but it's less powerful. I would not recommend doing this with Blightsteel Colossus because then your opponent just needs 2 toughness to block. So I don't like Blightsteel Colossus to do all these things with. So, and before I go out, I want to mention that if you have Emrakul, Kozilek or Ulamog, you don't have to scoop to it when your opponent brain freezes you because it shuffles back your entire library. So be aware of that. You have a nice pre-sideboarded protection from brain freeze. This could also be a liability. Let's say you're a blue-black reanimator, you have Shallow Grave, Corpse Dance, and you're trying to get Emrakul going. Be aware that if Emrakul ends up in your graveyard, it will mess up your entire graveyard. It will get shuffled in, so you will no longer have access to your graveyard as a resource to reanimate stuff. So sometimes, if I'm a dedicated reanimator deck, even if I have Shallow Grave, I may just not play Emrakul with Shallow Grave just to avoid the disaster scenario. So this was the first episode of my Vintage Cube deep dive on, and this time I was talking about Emrakul the Aeons Tour. Alright, so let's summarize this video then. Emrakul is good to use with sneak attack and through the breach. You often are blue-red. Blue gives you access to cantrips and digs you towards Emrakul. You can also use it with the Shallow Grey Corpse Dance. You often are a blue-black deck that wants to have ways to put cards in your graveyard from your hand. You can also hardcast it with Channel. You are blue-green with Mystical Tutor to go get Channel. You can be a Shelldock Isle, hardcasting Emrakul. You can also use big green ramp spells to power out Emrakul or in a Storm deck. And lastly, it is possible to show and tell Emrakul into play, although I don't recommend it. Thank you for watching.